Hey, what's up, guys? In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of how I was forced to give a DNA sample in prison. Okay? So, this happened on the day of my release. Alright? So, I had been denied parole twice prior, and on my third eligibility, they actually granted me parole. Okay? So, when they granted me parole, they told me your date is like 4 months away, meaning that 4 months from the day of the hearing, I would be released. So in those 4 months, I had a lot going through my mind. My biggest concern up until the day of the release, including that day especially, was that I would be picked up by the feds, by the federal government, and charged federally. For those of you that are not familiar, basically, if you have certain charges, specifically gun charges, okay? I had multiple gun charges. I also was charged with having modified weapons and having defaced weapons, meaning the serial number was scraped off the weapons. When you have certain types of charges such as those, oftentimes what happens is you get charged by the state, okay, wherever you live, and you do a state bid. You go to state prison. And then on the day of your release, the day you think you're going home, the feds show up. And now they hit you with new charges, federal charges, and you're starting a whole entire new process where you're likely going to do more time than what you already did. So even though you already served the time for the exact same charge, it is possible that this can happen. And it's happened to a lot of people that I've encountered in the years that I was in prison. So that was my biggest concern. I was dreading that happening to me. But in addition, I was stressed out in just thinking about going home. All the pressure that comes with going home. And what am I going to do now? Like, how am I going to survive? How am I going to make money? And, I have my girl who waited for me, who's now my wife. She waited so long for me. How am I going to take care of her? How am I not going to let her down and fail her? So I had so many things on my mind, and on that last day, it was a strange feeling I had, of a little bit of happiness, but more so fear of what was going to come now. I was more afraid of going home than staying in prison. In prison, I knew where I stood. I knew exactly what my place was. I know how to survive. I know how to live. There's no question about it. But being freed from prison, I was scared to death of failing. I didn't know if I could make it out there, especially because I was on parole. My thought always was that I would never take parole. I would just max out. Whatever my bid is, I'm going to max it out and go home free, off paper. The reason I took the parole was because of my girl, my wife. I thought it wasn't fair to her for me to do another 2 years or so just so I wouldn't have the burden of parole. But I was willing to do it because I always saw parole as like a setup and not truly being free. If I walk out of the prison, I'm leaving this fucking cage, I want to be completely free. I don't want to have restrictions. I don't want to be restricted on where I can go, having a curfew, not being able to go to certain places, not being able to leave the state, etc., etc. Having to report to this guy 2-3 times a week, having to be drug tested. I didn't want nothing to do with that. But I accepted it for her because of the sacrifice she made for me. So anyway, getting back to the story now. So on this day, I woke up real early. I worked out. I did my regular routine. And I've mentioned before, in prison, you don't tell people that you're going home or that you got a parole date. You don't want people to know when you're short because there are a lot of people who will go out of their way to fuck that up for you. They're just miserable, miserable people who have nothing to do with you, may not even know you. But they themselves have no chance of going home. They may be lifers or have really long bids, and they're just so fucked up in the head that seeing anybody else leave upsets them. So they would rather destroy that. So they'll attack you, for example, just jump you and start hitting you, knowing you have to fight back. You're going to catch a charge, and that's going to remove your parole. You just lost your parole date right there. So I didn't tell anybody. There were very few people that knew that I had gotten parole, and even fewer people knew the exact date that I was leaving. But there were some, that I was talking to and saying goodbye to. I left a lot of stuff for a lot of these people that knew. And, finally late in the afternoon, they called me down to the administrative building. I went down there. They put me in a cell, and, they did the process where they gave me like a $50 bill, which is nothing. All my property I had when I came in years prior into the county jail, I had released to my wife already. So I didn't have any property there. So they give you an outfit. You give them back the state clothes, the khakis, and they give you a pair of jeans and a white shirt. So I had that, and I had 2 bags of books that I wanted to keep, and that was it. So I'm sitting in this holding cell, and then these 2 officers come in with a nurse telling me that we're here to take your DNA sample. And I'm confused now. I'm like, what do you mean DNA sample? I'm not giving you my DNA. They said, you have to. I said, I'm not giving you my DNA. I never heard of this shit before. I'm not doing it. So we go back and forth. They're telling me that I have to. They're screaming at me and whatever. They're getting upset. I tell them, listen, just call a fucking lieutenant and let him come down here and let me talk to somebody above you. Get the fuck out of here. They go and do that. They bring the lieutenant back, and the lieutenant comes in, and he knew me from the compound. And he's like, Hollywood, what's up, man? I hear you're giving these guys a problem. Like, what the fuck are you thinking? You're going home. You're about to go home. Why the fuck are you giving my officers a problem? I'm like, look, I'm not trying to give anybody a problem. I'm not trying to fight. I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying that I never agreed to give my DNA at any point. All right? My sentence was a very complicated one. It was a long process of negotiations where I got sentenced to very specific things. Okay? None of which included or ever mentioned that I had to give DNA. So I was like, I'm not giving it. I'm not giving it. I got my data ready. Today's my day. I'm going home. I don't want nothing to do with this shit. I'm not giving you a DNA sample. So he starts explaining to me. He's like, listen, the bottom line is you have to. I was like, I'm not. What do you mean I have to? You're going to physically force me? I'm not fucking doing it. I'm not allowing it. He said, you have no choice. And again, I told him, what you're saying doesn't even make sense. I have no choice. I'm not going to fucking allow it. So whatever. You want to take me back to the cell block? I'll go back right now. And that's it. Fuck the parole date. I'm not giving you my DNA. He's like, Hollywood, you don't understand. Even if you go back to the unit right now, okay, and max out your bid, you will never walk out of prison without giving us this DNA sample. It is required by law because you're a violent offender. You must. And I said, well, what if I don't? He says, then you don't leave. You don't get released. And I said, for how long? And he says, indefinitely. And this was a lieutenant that I knew was not lying to me. He's not a bullshitter. And he told me flat out, that's the way the law is written. You will stay here forever. Even after having maxed out and completed your bid, you will never fucking leave this prison without giving us that DNA sample. And I was just devastated by that. I didn't want nothing to do with that shit. I don't want to be no DNA database, but I had to. I had no choice. So I ended up complying, and they took a DNA swab inside my cheek, and they have that on record now. So I am in that stupid fucking database of DNA. So that's the story, guys. A lot of you aren't aware of these type things that happen in jails and prisons, but at the end of the day, the moral of this story is there are things that you are not in control of when you're in those situations. You have no control whatsoever, and you're going to have to do things sometimes that you don't want to do, like in this case for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.